Adriana, welcome to the DaoLens Discord space. It is such a pleasure to have you. And our first question is, how you been doing?
Well, to say last week has been rough is an understatement, but I feel like I've been doing fairly well. I mean, as we all know, there's ebbs and flows in crypto, and I think, I'm very much a realist, so I'm not going to say it's easy, but I'm also not going to pop everyone's bubble straight out of the gate either. And I'll say we're getting through. I'm grateful for the team that I work with, and for the most part, feel like I'm ready to start a new week fresh and continue to work in the space and find ways to make it better. So I'm doing pretty good this morning. How about yourself?
I'm doing pretty great as well. It's always like super exhilarating to get to know new people and conduct these sessions, even though I've been doing it for a while now. Even before this, I was running my own podcast, but there's still this exhilaration of, you're a little nervous and excited, but I'm extremely excited to chat, because every time I feel like when we do it right, when we end up sharing people's story correctly or the journey correctly, it really ends up making an impact. So I think I know you have an incredible story, an incredible journey to have, and I feel like it's just such a pleasure to have this opportunity to share with our community. So I am super excited about it.
Great. Awesome. Yay.
My first question was about Odyssey, but just before, while we were backstage and chatting, something amazing you were talking about is, we all know what's been happening in the crypto space, right? Where people seem to be losing trust, and we are finding ourselves in extremely vulnerable spots. All of us are very, very aware of the negativities which are surrounding us, but I still want to ask you, what do you think that is still making crypto so strong?
I think the thing that makes crypto strong is, in some ways, the unrealized potential of the use cases of what crypto can be. I think we are the limit to our imagination, and when we look beyond that, we find ways to solve common and hard problems with unique solutions. And I think the great thing about crypto is that while there is a lot of fraud because it is a highly unregulated space, I also think there's a lot of innovation happening too. And something that I kind of posted out this weekend as I was gathering my thoughts for the week, as well as kind of the last 40 years, because I turned 40 this year, is that really there's, they say in psychology that for every negative interaction, it takes 5 positive reactions to counteract that. And I think whenever there's a big blow in crypto, it takes a lot of courage for people to continue to show up every day. Yeah. But I think that is one of the amazing things about the space, is the fact that there are people that still believe in its potential. And I don't think crypto's going anywhere. However it gets regulated over time, however governments choose to regulate it, I still think that it is a very strong technological space, and I think it has a lot of opportunity for accessibility, and I think there's a lot yet to be uncovered and innovated in this space that has yet to be realized. So that's kind of my 2 cents on continuing to try and be positive about the space despite the current landscape, but also recognizing that it requires a lot more transparency for those that are continuing to stay in the space than what currently is happening at the moment.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. I think it is extremely courageous for everyone who's in this space to show up every single day and even deal with people who are outside of this space with their cynicism and stuff. But yes, it is so important to, continuously wanting to show up. Let's go back to where you started your journey in DAOs from, right? Odyssey. Odyssey has been a place where a lot of people started their journey in DAOs as well. But we are currently seeing that a lot of changes that are happening. I would love for you to talk more on that.
Well, so I came into Odyssey I guess it's been almost a year since I've jumped into Web3. So
Yeah.
I can't believe that it has actually come to that point where I came in right around, so US Thanksgiving is, that holiday is approaching us. So right around that time, I can't remember if it was like Thanksgiving that I kind of discovered Odyssey or right in the beginning of December. But I came in with a little bit of a jaded perspective with U.S. education system and wanting to find different ways to learn. I've always struggled as an individual to test, and a little bit of background, the U.S. education system is primarily based on gauging people's intellect off of test scores, and not necessarily based off of their knowledge or how well they do things. And so Odyssey had won Product Hunt Award of the Year for 2021 as one of the best new kind of ed tech products, but also in Web3. And I loved that you could just come into Odyssey and dive in and learn. And I think that is one of the things that Odyssey does so well is they have amazing content, amazing writers, and founders that were really passionate about changing education in the space. And I think that's one thing that a lot of Web3 organizations do well is either provide free education, free access to education. They receive grants for that. But I also noticed that having come into Odyssey early, I came in and immediately started helping with kind of my transferable skills into the space with growth strategy, with some marketing and a little bit of design work, because I've worn a lot of hats over the years. And like a lot of communities in this space, they grew really fast, and have had an amazing team. Like I love absolutely everyone that I've collaborated with on, but like a lot of communities also, there's a lot of pain points that you don't anticipate when you grow fast, and try to manage that community, and try to launch a product and try to find product market fit. And so I would say, like with the shifting landscape, some of the big changes that Odyssey has implemented is that not necessarily that they have cut their community in half, but they've really looked at who was contributing consistently, how those contributions were happening, and how they could better serve their community. And so they made a really hard decision where they did a snapshot vote. Those that held token could vote on it, and it was to size down the community to focus on quality over quantity. And I think in this space and in business, a lot of people want to just look at KPIs based off of numbers. And when you go to business school, they want to know about quantitative, not as much about qualitative numbers. And I feel like I am a person that has a lot of ethics and integrity that revolves around quality that can't always be gauged, and so really something that Odyssey did was they sized down their community, and they now accept people in cohorts, and that was a really hard decision to make. But I think the biggest reason they made that decision is they needed to be able to continue to produce content. They needed to make it scalable, and they also needed to figure out what product market fit was. And sometimes when you have these really large communities, there's a lot of noise, but not a lot of direction. And so I feel like they had to do what's best for them. And I think that's the hardest thing in this space is that each community or each DAO, they have to understand what I call is community market fit. They have to look at how their community currently is, what the health of that community is, and if they can continue to scale at the current rate that they're at, and where pivoting or adjustments need to happen. And so it's been a very interesting process to watch Odyssey, gain in numbers and gain in volume. and also work really hard towards a goal, but then also have external variables affect that goal, specifically like the NFT bubble kind of popping, the Terra Luna crash. There were a couple things this spring. There was the Ronin bridge hack, quite a few things that happened this spring that slowed our trajectory significantly, where everyone kind of had to step back and really look at what are we trying to accomplish. And so their changes that they implemented was to size down and focus on building with people that were really passionate about Odyssey's mission. Yeah. And then, I hope over time that their community sticks around and that they can scale that in a way that is most beneficial to their users. So, yeah.
That's amazing. You have shared so many amazing key points, which I feel like we can have whole conversation start off of. I was just making my notes. First is the education system. There is nothing I have been more passionate about than the formal education system and how it really ends up boxing young minds. And it results in such bad behavior because you cannot judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree. And putting people against these tests and it's a very similar culture in Asia in general too, right? The WHO shared that there were like about 60% of suicides that happen in the age of when people are students and stuff happen in students in Asia and stuff. And it's because society boxes us into thinking if you're not good at school, you're not good at anything else. So I'm super curious to know, how was your journey in school? How were you able to rise above to think because when people find themselves I'm not good at testing, they feel like I just as a person am not good at, I won't be successful, I'm not competent, or if I'm not smart. So how were you able to put aside tests versus your intelligence as a person?
Lots of trauma. I laugh candidly, but I also, will be totally honest in that I have had challenges in my life, but at the same time, they are in no way as difficult as what other people have faced as far as challenges go. But I would say there is something that I don't know if I necessarily figured it out, but I would go through this process in my mind of the process of elimination. And usually that started with self-reflection, in that I would look and it was actually a very unhealthy habit that I had that, we don't realize we have some of these unhealthy traits, but it was always a feeling rejection and wondering what's wrong with me? And the interesting thing is I think we label that now as imposter syndrome. I don't feel like I have a place at the table, or I don't feel like I belong in this room. Yeah. And those messages start from a very, very early age. And I have a memory in first grade. I really struggled to read, and I had dyslexia. And it was interesting because I apparently was tested for it, but it was not disclosed to me till my 30s that, and my mother, I love my mom, and she made a conscious choice to just roll with it and to not kind of box me in to that learning disability. But that was something that I really struggled with, and yet I love to read, and I read all the time, and my brain still swaps numbers and letters, and I pronounce things wrong, but at the same time it's something that I had to let go. But in first grade, I just loved, I was very creative and very artistic, and we had a spelling assignment, and it had this adorable little caterpillar on it. And instead of working on the actual assignment, because I would get letters mixed up, I elaborately colored this worksheet. Yeah. And the messaging that I received was, if you would spend as much time on the actual assignment instead of on coloring the assignment, that you could have done well on this. And so it's interesting how we have these core things contribute to how we think about ourselves. And from a very early age, it was that I didn't feel smart enough. and it was because I was being gauged off of not my creativity, but instead these standardized forms of education. And I think from that, it stemmed into this self-reflection of, what am I doing wrong? How do I pivot? And it became this way of problem solving. And so it was kind of like finding different ways to open up the same door that other people were opening up. And for whatever reason, I just continued to push through and try and open up those doors. And I will say that with a caveat that it was not easy, and there were many times where I was like, I don't even know why I'm trying. And there are times that I feel that still now, like some of those early messages still affect us psychologically in different ways. And yet, for whatever reason, whether it's little bits and pieces of toxic perfectionism left over, but I just feel like I'm that type of person also that knows that I can do better. And so when you know better, you do better. And so I actually leveraged my creativity to find different ways to accomplish things. And people would always comment like, oh, I hadn't thought of that before. Oh, that's a unique way to do that. And it was hard for me to get to that place, but I also recognized that when I could take my skill sets and leverage those and not see it as a negative thing, then I could come to unique solutions that maybe other people weren't able to come to. So
that is phenomenal. So proud of you. I think this is a great example of, like how adversity can turn into an advantage. And you really went ahead and did that. And I feel like you're a standing example of when people feel like, oh, they're not smart enough because they're just judging themselves on the wrong tree, right? I think it's really amazing. I myself was like super had a really bad time at school, and that's where I lost a lot of trust in the formal education system. And it is still kind of unheard of to not go ahead and pursue your undergraduation, at least here in Asia. But I think Web3 is really giving people that opportunity to onboard and test their creativity and test their intelligence and test their hard work without anyone judging you, because Web3 is not taught in school, right? If you are credible and if you're ready to work hard and ready to learn, like, you can really make your way here. So I feel like that is such a phenomenal story. Thank you so much for sharing.
And it's really interesting too, because I, for the longest time, siloed art and creativity from science and math. And I actually think amazing mathematicians, statisticians, scientists, they actually have to have creativity to get to the formulaic solutions, to get to the hypothesis, to go through the scientific method, to test and evaluate. Like, it actually takes creative minds and leveraging different aspects of your mind to make things happen in even traditional STEM careers.
Absolutely.
And so when I realized that creativity is actually a unique skill set, it's that people may not even realize, like, they may say, oh, I'm not creative or I'm not artistic, but it takes creativity to come to formulaic solutions, even in very technological spaces or scientific spaces too. So
absolutely, props to you. I know it takes a lot of like rewiring your brain and talking in a self-love format to yourself to pull yourself out of what you have been constantly hearing and emerge victorious. So amazing. You earlier spoke about community market fit, and that is extremely interesting. I'd love for you to expand more on that. Like, what does community market fit exactly mean?
Oh, so when I came into this space, like, I came into Web3 with a 20-year history that evolved from design into front-end web development, understanding kind of the roles I've played both in branding, brand strategy, creative direction, marketing direction, like I've worn a lot of different hats over the years, but one of the big things that comes down to is understanding your core users, your core audience, and audience segmentation. And I think we focused a lot in Web 2 on individual users and how to serve them. And over time, building in accessibility, really understanding pain in the problem space. And I think the unique opportunity that I really started to notice, especially being in Odyssey, was looking at our community and also looking at other communities and other DAOs that I was popping into and observing. And I'm sort of a pattern identifier, and that like I like to observe the landscape first and kind of see what's happening. And I realized that there's an opportunity to be had, not just with finding product market fit and building for the individual core user, but that there are these products that communities are passionately backing. And I think when you hit this, the Japanese term I believe is ikigai, and I may be pronouncing it wrong, so I apologize, but it is the concept of fusing together like passion, skills, and basically relevancy on how to monetize, you know, and not to sound capitalistic in any sort of way, but just doing what you love and finding that sweet spot. And I think with community market fit, you are trying to build something that attracts people that are going to support the build of that. And so in a traditional product marketing role, you are looking at your growth loops from awareness, acquisition, retention, loyalty, and referral, and how to create loops to suit all of that. And I've noticed in Web3 that the community acquisition, communities grow so fast. And then it's very tough to navigate how to not necessarily keep the community happy, but to find that community fit. And so like that comes back to the conversation of transparency. Like you attract in what you put out. And at the same time, you may attract a really strong core community, but the messaging can get diluted over time. And so your community over time can also become more diluted. And where do you find those passionate individuals to continue to help uplift and build together with what you're building, and how do you support them in that build? And so I think it's important to start having conversations and start to be thinking about, which I think a lot of communities do and do well, but thinking about community market fit. Community, especially in a DAO when you have governance, can really drive the roadmap of the product, and yet they still need the vision of the core team and the founders kind of help bring that full circle. Absolutely. And it's like, how do you find that common ground between the two?
Absolutely. So from Web3 is a place where community is not a luxury. Community is where, community turns the wheel, whether it's an NFT project, whether it is a DAO where full-fledged people participate in governance and stuff. How do you feel like how can people achieve community market fit? Because it's really hard. That does not mean that growing your numbers on Discord. That's easy. Or onboarding more people to your DAO. But like you said, a passionate community that's backing a product. Does that mean like people need to identify the correct persona of the kind of people they're trying to attract? How can people achieve that community market fit?
I do think that there's some degree of analysis that goes with identifying that persona. I think the communities that start small and do their due diligence to identify what type of users and what type of personas they want to attract into the community probably are more successful in attracting a more authentic community to their product. And so they're hitting community market fit early on, and I think they get good traction as well. And a great example of that is Ethereum Foundation. And whether or not they went through that process early on, looking at how passionate they are about what they're doing and the type of talent that they attract is a good example of whether they went through a formal exercise of understanding what community market fit looks like. Like they continually set the standard for the space as far as what they're doing. And so I would say this, like on the flip side, like you said, it's easy to grow a Discord, it's easy to grow in numbers, and sometimes you have to reverse engineer that process. And with that, you have to accept that there may be churn that happens because of that, because of expectations or unmet expectations. People may come into a community expecting one thing and not understanding fully the vision of what they're trying to build. And so I do think there's this sweet spot of understanding your users and how to best serve them while also making sure that you are continuing to build and support the utility of whatever it is you're trying to launch and making sure that there's alignment there and being transparent as much as you can through that process.
Absolutely. Would you say that Biconomy has achieved community market fit?
I feel like Biconomy has a really strong core audience, and I think at the same time, like any growing organization, I think we are in a shifting landscape, and so there's this cross of building fast, which especially a lot of more technical Web3 companies are also dealing with this, in that you build fast. A lot of times you are getting to launch, or you're getting to testing, or you're getting to iterating. And so I think sometimes there's different levels of community expectation that you can't make everybody happy, and so I think with Biconomy, like we have a strong core team that's very passionate about what we're building, and I think we also have a very big community that we are working to try and focus on meeting their needs, and I think it takes time. It's more about relationship building, and so it's not that I don't feel that we haven't met our goals, but I think like any iterative or agile process, it's a work in progress.
Yeah.
And so I think there are different phases of going through different aspects where we've had a token launch that naturally attracts a lot of people to the space that are interested in the hype and the investment, and they're interested in the core product, and they're interested in the potential of that product. But a lot of people churn out because they get bored too.
Yeah.
And so it's not necessarily Biconomy or any other organization for that matter. It's looking at after the dust settles, who's there still building in the end, and how do we serve them best? And I think that's an evolving landscape, and you have to constantly be evaluating and reflecting and pivoting to just kind of steer the ship. And at the same time, as we are working towards decentralization, also looking at, how do we hand that governance back to the community as we take a phased approach towards decentralization.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing that. I wanted to jump to a really interesting question, which is an ideal DAO structure. And the reason for that is, like, from your experience at being in Odyssey to now being the DAO lead at Biconomy, imagine you have all the tools, all the infrastructure. I would love for you to take us through like an end-to-end, a whole 360 degree on an ideal DAO structure. Like people would describe the ideal vacation, right? From onboarding to management to contribution, compensation, payroll. Like, how does an ideal structure for you look like?
This is a hard question for me to answer because my brain wants to go to what's comfortable and what I'm used to in Web 2, Yeah. And I think in some ways, there are expectations that people have and that they want the security and the safety of a Web 2 world. They want contracts. They want to know that they're going to get paid in a timely manner if they're contributing to a DAO. They want to understand what their roles and responsibilities are. And this is a very Web2 systemic and hierarchical construct that people are used to, and yet they come into Web3 recognizing that there are certain systems that are broken and that are no longer working, and they're looking for innovation. And they're looking for whether it's governance, shifts in governance, or shifts in how they perceive their role, or their ability to have perceived value and paid for that value.
Yeah.
I honestly don't feel like there's, and this is terrible because I feel like there's no right way or no perfect snapshot of infrastructure, tools, payroll that make a perfect DAO structure. It actually goes more back to that community market fit of what can you as an organization do to decentralize certain aspects. Then also too, what tools exist on chain currently? Are they efficient to documentation with setting those roles up? And I will be totally honest, there is a lot of amazing tooling that's happening right now. There are easier and more efficient Web2 solutions that still, it's not that they work better, but they've been around much longer. And so in some ways, when I talk about a phased approach to decentralization, it's that right now we're operating in a hybrid model. We're trying to bring in different tooling that are helping us towards decentralization and helping us towards increased transparency, which is one of our big goals as an organization. That our solution may not be the right solution for the next DAO. I think that's where governance and also infrastructure play a big hand. Is I kind of go at this from like a curious approach, in that it's like, I would say if I were advising another DAO, I would say, what's the current size of your community? And how fast are you wanting to onboard people from that community into contributor roles? And asking questions that help them then determine what sort of tooling they can explore to be the most effective for their DAO. And so, for example, coming into our community, the biggest piece that I kind of stepped right into was solving for our grants program, and recognizing what is the most efficient interim solution that can get us towards on-chain solutions over time. So we worked in a Web2 realm with processing our first cohort of applications, but we tried to start to implement different mechanisms that would step us towards governance and voted cohorts over time, by having a DAO council that could evaluate applications so that there's not one person bottlenecking that process, and then bringing in tooling for applications that are visible and on-chain, which we're utilizing Questbook for that. And we're also working with Builders Tribe for microgrants. So it's hard because I can't give you a straight answer, and it's more that we're testing different tooling, and I feel like DAOs should be able to test tooling and then be able to leverage and bootstrap their communities to provide input towards that. I also think there needs to be some understanding that someone may be in the community but not be actively contributing, and I don't feel like it's not that their vote doesn't matter, but it's that it doesn't impact them as much because they're not working day to day on that. And so it's also figuring out, how do you bootstrap governance? Is it reputation based governance? Is it quadratic voting? Is it, there's so many different ways to do things. And so again, it's curiously understanding the things that are going to help continue to move you forward, and then setting in an infrastructure and a set of systems that you can test and iterate on that help actually create a customized approach to your DAO or your community or both that is somewhat customized solution. And we'll see there's players out there, like I firmly believe in multi-sig wallets where we have a treasury that we're dispersing. There are things to consider that when we're dispersing funds, that we want to make sure that those funds are ethically used, and so we will put in different things like or different requirements that can seem tedious, but that I think help protect the integrity of processes. And even then, nothing's perfect, There's compensation models. We're also dealing with a global industry, so there's different compensation in the US versus in Asia versus India versus the UK, and so it's trying to understand how do we compensate, what does that compensation look like, how do we negotiate that with those that are coming into these roles, and then how do we build that trust over time, and a lot of that relies on, it's hard because you're still relying on trusting humans that you don't know across the world, and I think that each person is operating with integrity, and that is this whole last week is that we had a whole centralized exchange crash, and there was a lot of trust put into that, and while there's technology and there's ways to do KYC and there's ways to vet individuals, there's also intrinsic human behavior and motives that no one can see into.
Absolutely.
And so yeah, I feel like giving you a 360-degree snapshot of this is the best tool and this is why is not a one-size-fits-all solution. And I think that's where it gets actually back to the education conversation, and that I think of square peg, round hole. No DAO is going to have a perfect solution that works for all the other DAOs, and it's up to community and the leadership as to how to determine what that process looks like. There's great tools that are being built in Web3, and there are also great founders that don't have the visibility or the accessibility that have amazing ideas. But I think Web3 is giving them that opportunity, and so it's more of how fast do you need to implement infrastructure, and what things can you put in place at least temporarily to help continue to push out work and get things done as you evolve over time.
Absolutely.
And I think the biggest key is people. It's actually bringing in people that can help the DAO or the community organize, and then focusing on the tooling that best supports those organized efforts.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing such an alternate answer, honest answer. You're right. One size does not fit all, and I think it's very comfortable to for a lot of DAOs to hear, right? Like everyone's trying to figure it out. There is no perfect way to do it, right? It's a lot of trial and error. Like you figure out things. What is something that's working for you is not necessarily what might work for someone else, right? Amazing. I know that Biconomy, and you kind of slightly touched upon it as well, has a grants program. And we actually recently got a grant from our way as well. And I was amazed to see that there are so many projects who are giving out grants. Even Nouns DAO seems to be giving out grants left, right, and center. But there is no way to track these milestones. So when payments are being released, the whole grant system is still not very decentralized. So how is it that you guys are tracking projects once you release those grants?
So, we by no means are the golden standard, but I think one of my big kind of initiatives with our grants program was to first observe other grants programs and talk to grantees. And actually, I did a lot of user interviews as I was kind of working on Our grants program was kicked off prior to me coming on board, but kind of looking at not just the pain points that we were experiencing, but that I feel like the industry was experiencing with grants as a whole. There's something new that I learn every day with regards to just foundation style work, and that there's Web 2 foundations and grants, and it's fairly interchangeable with regards to their voting and governance process, and who is allowed to vote, you know, how that goes through boards of directors, how much budget is allocated, you know. In Web3, it's very different because the money, it can flux so much in the space. You know, you can have a bull market and have an excess amount of money, and a lot of money can be siphoned into a foundation and given away, and then you can have a bear market where you're scaling back and trying to determine, do we serve more projects with less amount given, or less projects with more amount given? Like, how do we pivot, you know? And I think with that, really, with the grants process, it's very hard because it's a very hybrid process right now, and we're learning like everybody else in the space. But some of the feedback, at least from like user interviews that I conducted early on, was that there's a couple different types of grant programs, and some are very transactional, where, you know, you put in your proposal, the proposal's voted on, and then you just kind of hunker down and get things done. But there's not a lot of back and forth. And then when it's time to, you know, you have your milestones dispersed, there's not a lot of visibility on either side. And so on the grant side, they're saying, well, what have you done, you know, for us to disperse this tranche? And I think that's where I've realized that, like, there does need to be not necessarily rule setting or hierarchical control, but I do think there needs to be transparent conversations around expectations. And so it's very interesting because I kind of personally took this approach that I'm going to set an infrastructure and we can evolve it over time, but I'm going to add tools to our grantees that can help them even in future grant applications, whether they're with Biconomy or not. And so, but it is a lot of Web 2 infrastructure right now. A lot of it is documentation in Notion and giving them a project charter and asking them to set milestones prior to their application. And then from there, basically those that are willing to do their due diligence are more inclined to succeed in receiving grant funding. Then at that point, also setting the expectation that they're managing their projects. We're giving them an infrastructure, but it's their responsibility to manage the milestones. But instead of setting it like milestone to milestone over time, we're at least giving it a skeletal structure. Then if it does need to pivot, we've already set the stage for those conversations and what that cadence looks like, and basically we give out those expectations and they get to choose whether they want to opt in or not. And even then, it's not a perfect process, you know. We recognize too that, like, with market fluctuations in a traditional grants program in the US, you know, that money is reserved in a savings account. You know, there's not a lot of market fluctuation that's happening to those funds set aside. And so when you have a grants program that's in crypto, that's in a highly fluctuating market, you can have a lot of money in your treasury one day and not a lot of money in your treasury the next day. And you have a commitment to your grantees. And so there's a lot of moving parts that have to be considered in Web3 that I think there has to be a lot of understanding on both sides. And I know it's been a difficult week for me, and yet I feel like I've had a lot of support from our core team. We've had a lot of transparent conversations about, you know, how to move forward. And while we feel really lucky that we have been less impacted as others in the space, there's still hard conversations that you have to have with different team members. And I, by no means, am perfect, and I don't have a perfect system. And I just hope that people have grace with me as I navigate this process, like I know other people collaborating in other DAOs and in other grant programs are doing as well. But yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah, I completely agree that there has to be more transparency and more clarity in kind of what are the expectations that both parties hold. And this is a pain point we see a lot of people with grants echoing, right? Like there is no tangible way right now for you to track milestones. And for that reason, like we at DaoLens here also are working on a smart contract that's able to help you track these metrics, but we're not here to talk about that. That's amazing. So I think the next question I really want to jump to, but before I do that, community, please know that this is a live session. What's amazing about live sessions is you can directly ask your questions to Adrian. So please feel free to drop them in the chat below. Aurora Borleys, I already see you have a question there, which we will quickly jump to. But before that, coming to a topic that is super close to our hearts, women in the Web3. It is a boys club out here. We in our organization also have like 30 people, and we're just like 2 women, Sejal and I. But I want to ask you, like, what's your perspective on this? Like, why are there such few people? Is there a lack of awareness? Is it that women don't know where to start? Why are we finding ourselves at this spot again?
I think this goes back to a lot of systemic programming. You know, we're talking about centuries of systemic role definition of the difference between what roles males and females fulfill traditionally. And I think I think the hope is always that in a new space, there's going to be more equalization over time. But I think I also want to be very cognizant of the fact that we're not just talking about the male-female dynamic or construct. We're talking about how people identify, whether they're non-binary, transgender, LGBTQ, whether it's like their ethnicity, what sort of region they're coming from. It's that there still has so much work to be done to help support any type of marginalized individual. And I think a good example of that is when you learn in user experience about accessibility, the solution that people seem to come to is, well, we want equality to them is giving everyone the same thing, and they did this very simple, there's this very simple diagram out there where it's like, there's a contest for people to slam dunk in a basketball hoop. And they have, like 5'2" woman, and they've got people of all these different heights. And people think that to be equal is to give everyone the same access to resources and that accessibility. And so they give everyone a 2-foot platform to stand on. Well, that 5'2" woman is now 7'2", but that 6-foot person is now like they can hold the rim, and so while you're distributing equal things, you're still not creating equality. And the difference is that you have to actually shore up most marginalized individuals, and you actually have to give more and find ways to create more accessibility. And so in Web3, I think it's hard because women have less accessibility. And I think there's also this programming that I even have girlfriends who are like, I'm just not technological. And I think, where does that messaging come from? I'm like, you utilize your phone to buy groceries from your phone to, you actually use technology more than you realize. Why do you think you're not technological? And I think it's one, changing the narrative and the messaging early on that understanding, one, that not everyone has access. And so there's that hurdle you have to get through. And number 2, if people have access, why are we giving people different messaging? why are we like, it's that people should feel empowered to choose a path and not feel different because of that, and yet recognizing people's inherent differences in how they learn and how they approach things. And so I feel like the key thing is there's not a lot of women in the space because we don't have a lot of women in technology at all. Like whether it's Web 2, Web 3, they don't have accessibility. And then additionally, we don't have a lot of on-ramps to that accessibility. And so that's going to create one more step that makes it harder for women to get into Web3. And so I think, and at the same time, I feel like one of the things that I loved about Web3 was that there was less of a barrier to entry. Yeah. And there have been some really hard technological aspects that I've had a hard time wrapping my brain around, but there has also been some things that are a no-brainer for me. And so coming into that space, like you have to find ways to on-ramp people where they're at. You have to reach down to where they're at. You cannot expect them to bridge that gap. And so I feel like a lot of it is bridge building that happens in this space to bring more women into this space, more non-binary individuals, and to support them in finding success in the space.
Amazing. I couldn't agree more. But what do you feel like, not as an organization, not as a community, but what is something that we can do on an individual level to bridge that gap?
I think just talking about the space, like when I think of traditional growth loops, awareness is the first key point. And I think the second thing is creating relatable use cases. Like it's easy to go in and say, oh, well, there's this technological use case with a smart contract. And the minute you start
using that jargon.
When you talk about contracts, you call it, like in the US, we joke about it's legalese. It's all this fancy legal jargon around contracts that like people are just like, I'm checking out. Like this is way over my head. Yeah. So it's like, how do we simplify for the user? How do we create simplified messaging and awareness? And then how do we like really target use cases? So for example, like for me, the thing that actually was really intriguing to me about the space was when I read the Bitcoin white paper. It talked about kind of the removal of the middleman. And it's a very technological paper, but I had just finished certifying as a mediator. And it was interesting because with that, like, I was thinking about what is the middleman, what's the role of mediation, how do we bring people to common ground, and when I volunteer in the U.S. court systems, I'm often having to help people find solutions for conflict, and so my brain just did this thing where I was like, I don't understand the technology behind a smart contract, but if a smart contract could govern like a lease and an eviction, if it could contract like a paycheck and a disbursement. I am a single parent, and you know, we have to co-parent, and we have to navigate paying for children's expenses and paying for children's medical things when we're not in alignment. And I'm like, man, if a smart contract could govern that, that would be amazing. Like in some ways, and so it's like creating understandable, relevant use cases for people in their everyday lives, I think is what will bring more people into the space. And understanding what those use cases look like specifically for women and non-binary individuals, to create that bridge is what will ultimately attract them into the space to learn more.
I love that answer. Creating relatable use cases, I think, more helpful than educating people and giving definitions of what is a smart contract or what is a DAO. I think talking and making content around how is it that it affects your life as a single mom, as a non-binary person, as someone who is an artist, as someone who's a chef, like how does this relate to you and how is it that they can help you? Amazing. Andreen, tell me, I feel like what you went through as a person and where you are today has absolutely been a phenomenal journey. But I'm sure, like, as a woman, it was a struggle for you to be where you are. Because as much as we want to talk about inclusivity and stuff like that, it, like, you do have to fight for yourself a lot, right? I was just reading this book, Lean In by Sheryl Sandberg, and there she was talking about, like, oh, you know, when women want to ask for a raise, men are evaluated based on their potential versus women are evaluated on their past achievements. So, you know, I'm sure you also had multiple milestones in your life. Like, what did that journey look like? I mean, I am extremely curious to know.
I'll be totally honest. I still struggle with this, but we can talk about it. It's how you frame it in your mind. There have been a lot of milestones, but if I'm being 100% honest with you today, a lot of those milestones happen because of failure. And there are times where failure can feel more overwhelming than the milestone. And at the same time, like, failure is an opportunity to learn. And I think every time I've hit a really big milestone, it hasn't been without significant hardship and failure that made me look and evaluate at what wasn't working and pivot. And I think it's also a very lonely place to get to where you're at as a woman. I will say I have had times where I've had significant support, and times where I felt completely alone, and then times where, you know, our minds do things where it's not that they play tricks on us, but depending on the level of stress that we may be carrying or the personal hardships that we may be going through, we also may not be able to see opportunities to take until we're ready to see them. And so for me, it's that I had a lot of things that I love and don't regret, but it was a juggling act. Like, I am a mom. I was raising children while still trying to stay relevant in a career. I lived in a very rural area for a long time that limited my accessibility to corporate jobs. And so I had to really fight for visibility. And I had to put myself out there over and over again. And I had to face rejection over and over again. And it was hard. And I think at the same time, like, you hit these milestones, and sometimes I think as women too, like when you talk about the book Lean In, like, we don't have a lot of people leaning into us. And so sometimes it's really hard to see what's next if you don't have someone there that's 2 steps ahead of you. And so I would say, like, one of the most powerful things for me was understanding or learning this idea or methodology that, like, for the cumulative effect of the 5 people you spend the most time with.
Absolutely.
And those people should fill different roles, you know, mentor, cheerleader, someone to mentor you, but someone that you can also mentor and give back. Then, you know, support systems. And I think everyone has access to that. And if you don't, where do you go out and find it? And how do you build that network? And I think that's something that I realized that we are surrounded by healthy individuals or are unhealthy ourselves. We have to figure out how to get into a better headspace, pivot. And so I think it's also changing that narrative. Like, you have to learn how to tell your story in an articulate way that can explain some of the difficulties you faced, but that also show perseverance and the ability to overcome.
Yeah.
One of the things I had was that I've consistently worked in the space for 20 years, but people would look at different things as career gaps. And until the pandemic, that was a huge stigma. And then all of a sudden that went away. And I think it's because everybody had a career gap at some point during the pandemic. And part of me felt bitter because I was like, well, this is ridiculous. Like all of a sudden that's acceptable now. Like I've had a lot of stigmatization because of that, because of child rearing, because I had a child with major medical that required me to prioritize his medical needs sometimes over my career. And at the same time, like not playing the victim, you have to find a way to help people understand that, like, I basically just said, look, I'm still here. Like, I'm still working, I still have relevant skills, and you have to find those opportunities. And at the same time, I really appreciate the different clients that I had over the years that put their trust in me, that, I found the types of clients and the type of work could help me grow. And I had to put so much effort into going out and finding that. And so I think, don't just look at this as a huge success story. They're tiny little atomic pieces, which I love James Clear's book, Atomic Habits, unsponsored plug for Atomic Habits, but like these microscopic changes, these tiny little atomic changes that are molecular, and then we stack them on top of each other, helps create that explosion of success later on that you're constantly building to get where you need to be. And I think it can be a very lonely space for a woman. I think finding those people is crucial to helping feel like you're on the right path, especially when you're having doubts about who you are as an individual.
Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that, right? Like building your network, you are the average of 5 people you associate with most. Couldn't have said it better. I'd love for us to take some community questions, and thank you everyone for dropping your questions in the chat. Adrian, would you like to read out the question?
How to financially value, let's see, question for Adrian, how to financially value a Web3 community financial framework. This is a tough one. This is a great question. I feel like when you're financially valuing, we're dealing with fluctuating market. And so I think to financially value a community or financial framework, you also have to look at your personal values and how you fit into that framework. So I guess my question back is also like, when you're financially valuing it, are you looking at how do you value it so that you can determine whether or not you want to contribute or participate in it, or strictly from an investing standpoint? And so I sometimes I answer a question with a question because I want to understand better what that person is looking for to then be able to better answer. But if I were to say, financially value a Web3 community or financial framework from a contributor standpoint, I would look into who the core team is, if they're doxed or undoxed, what sort of layers of transparency do they have within their community, what sort of infrastructure do they have in place. And I'll say that with a caveat of, a lot of them, there are some that they're working towards that infrastructure, but they don't have it all figured out yet, And so I would say people like, for example, coming into Biconomy, they may not be able to find that information, and it's because we're actively building that right now, and we're in kind of the middle of that. And so, but we're trying to consistently give people direction, bring more people on board, help in creating that transparency. And I think from there, financial value is not just about like the monetary value maybe of a token-backed community and the utility behind the product and all of these financial and technical terms, but more about looking at the health of the community in relation to what you're trying to do. And then you place that value on that. For me, coming into Odyssey, the big financial value for me was free education. They had and also the opportunity to network with individuals and learn from them while I was transitioning into the space. And so that wasn't like anything that I could put a dollar amount on, but it was still financially valuable to me because it was bringing in skill sets that could help me transition into a professional space. And as far as the financial framework, I would say over time, DAOs are just still very new. And I think everyone is trying to figure out how to be more transparent in the space, but there's no right answer to that. So, come into a community and ask a lot of questions. And if you want to be part of building that framework and you feel like there's enough of alternative transparency or infrastructure that will help you determine how to financially value that for yourself. But that's kind of an individualistic approach that I take. That I'm very risk averse, and so I observe a lot. I identify patterns before I dive in, and so that's something that I did a lot of research before coming on to Biconomy. I researched our founders. I researched the project. I looked at their community and it wasn't like I was looking for 100% on all of these things, but I was looking at the viability of that and the flexibility and the transparency. And then I had to make that decision for myself. And in some ways it was a big leap of faith. And in other ways, I'm very grateful that I did my due diligence. People say in Web3, DYOR, do your own research. I cannot emphasize that enough. And it's not like if you get scammed, you deserve it. I in no way say that either, because we are putting our trust in people that are following some centralized systems that are supposed to protect us. But what I am saying is you have to kind of figure out what that looks like and how to tie value to that. And I actually look more at qualitative than I do quantitative. I look at integrity and ethics and how they're showing up as individuals, and then also how that ties to their financials.
Amazing. Thank you so much for taking that up, and thank you so much for your question, Aurora. I would love for you to take up the next question as well. Should I read it out?
Yeah, if you want to go ahead and share the question, that's great.
Cool. It says, what process did Biconomy follow to attract full-time contributors / employees?
So I will, again, being fully transparent here, we are a centralized organization working towards decentralization. And so we have more of a traditional hierarchical structure in that we did not start as a DAO. And yet we recognize the value of decentralization. It's crucial to our product success, and so we are taking a phased approach towards decentralization. But as far as our full-time employees, they've gone through a more traditional vetting process through either recruiting and hiring processes that are standard to Web 2. And part of my responsibilities as coming in as head of DAO is to figure out how do we create the landscape for contributors, how do we create that intrinsic value to incentivize people to be a part of our community, to work in as DAO contributors, and what does that look like, whether it's a contract role, whether it's bounty hunters, whether it's becoming a full-time DAO contributor that transitions into an employee role. We're still mapping that out, and that's not something that happens overnight. And so I would say, our initial process is that we are a centralized org that is working on we're kind of in a hybrid model, but we're working towards the centralization. So we had a very traditional trajectory initially, and now we're exploring how DAO contribution and community contribution fits that puzzle piece into the organization, and how we expand kind of our current infrastructure in a more decentralized way. And I would say our process really is, again, observing the landscape, looking at other DAOs, what they're doing well, what their pain points and struggles are, and then everything's very iterative, putting out a hypothesis, testing that hypothesis, and then evaluating that over time.
Thank you so much for taking that up. I also know that Biconomy is launching the Biconomy SDK in less than 24 hours. I'd really love for you to kind of shed some light on that. Super excited to hear that.
So I will say this with a caveat that I am what's considered a quote unquote non-technical role. So I am not best person to explain all the nuances of the technology behind the Biconomy SDK, but what the Biconomy SDK is really an onboarding tool. Our primary audience is developers. And so it is creating, our mission is to not just onboard 1 billion people to Web3, but to create tools by developers for developers to help with that onboarding process. And as we all know, there are so many different transactions that have to happen when you are transacting in Web3, It's learning about the difference between a centralized exchange and a decentralized exchange, and a hot wallet and a cold wallet, and a self-custodied wallet versus a custodied wallet, and so there's all these different pain points. There's gas fees, and there's also potentially transaction fees that are independent of that, and so there are all these different hurdles with onboarding. That's just like, I'll go back to my social login and that's good. It's that people accept what's comfortable for them until they're forced to change because they realize that it's no longer working for them. And there's been so much spent in Web 2 on crafting this seamless user experience. And so the Biconomy SDK is really, it's a solution to a problem that helps facilitate onboarding through an SCW, a smart contract wallet that helps support account abstraction. And when we talk about account abstraction, we are talking about basically abstracting away or subtracting, taking away the hard parts of coming into Web3 and simplifying that. And so we're really breaking it down and creating this seamless flow of going through instead of having to go through all of these different steps with swapping and liquidity and worrying about slippage and all these different things, and we're wrapping that up into a more user-friendly solution, not just for devs, but for devs and users, how they're integrating within the projects that they're working on in the dApps and the products that they're building. Creating the on-ramp into Web3 that is simplified. So the SDK is a roll-up of some of our core products, two of which, Gasless and Hyphen, our bridge layer, and offering gasless transactions, along with some additional exciting different features that, will all be part of our launch day tomorrow, where, everybody will get to see kind of firsthand some of the big things we're doing with the Biconomy SDK, and also open sourcing that and working towards decentralizing that as well, so other people can build Legos on top of that. So really, really a cool product, and it's been a really great time to be a part of the team and watch, especially our technical development team, build that, and watch everyone in their different roles come together and really lean in.
That's so cool. For everyone, if anyone's watching a pre-recorded version, which people will, it's 14th of November, so Biconomy launches SDK tomorrow. And I feel like there'll come a time where Web3 will touch everyone, and that's going to be a time where people don't know the technology behind it. They won't know the complicated blockchain aspects of it. It's going to be really simple. And I feel like this tool of Biconomy and tools as such is what is going to help with that mass adoption. So so excited for you guys to build that. And Adrian, were you a part of Biconomy when they were still trying to find that product market fit? If yes, what was that journey like, and how long did it take you guys? Because I can't imagine the kind of long process that would be in such an ambiguous space.
So I have only been a part of Biconomy for about 6 months, which in crypto, that feels like years. But I will say Biconomy's been in the space for about 3 years. You know, we're about 3.5 years. The week that I actually onboarded was kind of our 3-year birthday or anniversary, whatever you want to call it. And so I feel like, you know, like any new organization, they're trying to find product market fit over time. And so I will say that with different products, you know, Biconomy's hitting product market fit in a lot of different ways right now. But I also feel like, again, that's an iterative process, in that we serve so many different use cases right now because there's just such a need for simplified onboarding into Web3, and to bring that account abstraction away through a smart contract wallet, essentially. And so I will say that it's a collective team effort to kind of find product market fit. And at the same time, I feel like that is an evolution as well. You know, with our products, with gasless, for example, that's a standard use case, that abstracting away gas fees for the end user is something that everyone knows is beneficial to the market. And so that was kind of an easy product market fit to find. And we've had great success with that, with good volume, you know, and other people have similar products that are competitive products, you know. And I would say the same thing with Hyphen and how those are now becoming part of the larger Biconomy SDK. You know, people have mixed feelings about bridges, and granted, there have been a handful of bridge hacks, and so naturally, people are going to be wary of a technology that they may not necessarily understand, or that it may not have a security layer that is not impenetrable. And I think with any sort of technology, you have to constantly be auditing, you have to be looking at your code, you have to be determining that security layer to protect your end user, you know, all of things which Biconomy does well. And at the same time, you know, again, that's another piece of that product market fit. You know, with Biconomy, we're focused on simplifying the user experience. And so with that understanding, it's like finding the product market fit is also being able to understand how we can simplify that user experience through a suite of developer tools that really support our developers in the space to succeed and have success where they're building.
That's amazing. I am so excited to see what you guys have even in the pipeline now, and the launch with SDK tomorrow. I think it's going to be really awesome when it comes to life for the community. Last question. Adrian, if you had access to Naval Ravikant's Twitter, and to put it in a different way, like, what would you say is your philosophy as a person?
Oh, gosh. That is a hard question. And at the same time, it seems like a simple question too. Like, just be a good person. Like, honestly, I feel like integrity is probably one of my biggest core values. And at the same time, I am so far from perfect. Like, we all have our challenges, we all make mistakes. But I think having good intent and having integrity is probably one of my biggest core values. And some people, it drives crazy because they want me to just relax a little bit, you know, and at the same time, I think integrity drives a lot of our decisions in any sort of industry that we work in. And it takes a lot of self-discipline to constantly choose that day to day. And I think to choose up. And I think the other thing too that I absolutely love about Web3 is that I don't feel like I fit a quote unquote normal mode. Like I'm always questioning what is normal.
Yeah.
I think finding ways to allow people to show up authentically as themselves is another core value of mine. In that I want to understand if I am having resistance with someone, I used to feel like I needed to control the situation. It was the fear of the unknown that led me to need to kind of like control a situation. And I feel like now you can actually, it's not that you're trying to control a situation, but if you can understand humans in a way that like you can understand their pain, then you can find common ground a lot faster. So when I really try to approach people that I may be experiencing resistance with because of my own personality, I try to approach it from an understanding standpoint, but both people have to be willing to lean in. And I think that takes a lot of autonomy. And that's what I love about, people talk about DAOs, they talk about decentralized autonomous organizations, but people, it's like, what is that really? And I think when you step into being like authentic is who you are as an individual and autonomous, and it's not that you don't want to answer to people anymore, but it's that you are committed to getting things done, independent of someone having to follow up on you.
Yeah.
And that you are working autonomously to support and lean in those that you are working with instead of working against them.
Yeah.
And so integrity, leaning in, being autonomous in your work, I think, and also being willing to let go of or being willing to unlearn certain things that you realize may not be a solution forward. We have to know when to dig our feet in and be strong alone versus compromise and working together. And there's a fine line with that. But like I said, I am not perfect, but I really try hard to understand people first. And I feel like when other people can lean into that, then we usually can find a solution where everybody wins. And it's not always easy to do.
Thank you so much for sharing that. It was so needed to hear, and I couldn't agree more. Like in DAOs, as much as we love the autonomous nature of them, with that also comes the responsibility of having ownership, like you said, integrity, right? If you be a person of your word, right? If you say you're going to do something, you should follow up and do it without having the need for someone to follow up on you. So absolutely amazing, and thanks for just being such a beautiful person. All the things you shared was just like super heartwarming, and so proud of the kind of person you have almost cultivated yourself into. It was such a pleasure to host you. Thank you for such a phenomenal session. Any ending thoughts?
I just want to say thank you for hosting me. I really appreciate the conversation, especially considering current landscape of crypto and how hard it is to navigate sometimes. And I just feel like we're all in this together. And however much we can contribute or just observe, like I would just encourage everyone to take it at your own pace. It's really easy to feel like everybody knows more than you do, or people are further along than you are, and how are you ever going to catch up? And I think there's not a lot of people in Web3, and there's going to be an influx of people that continue to come in. And so I think just being open to people's paths and understanding of that is a way to help this place succeed, and also just being good people, Yes.
Thank you, Adrian. Thank you so much for being awesome and just an amazing person. And thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in. Really, really appreciate you guys. And please look forward to this episode dropping very soon. And please look forward to Biconomy's SDK dropping tomorrow. All right. See you guys. Bye, everyone. Good night and good morning, wherever you are.
Thank you so much.